Okay, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Judith Levins, who is our demonstrating artist tonight. And I have the pleasure of taking her and her husband Peter, who is right up there, to dinner tonight, and got to know them a little bit. Judy and Peter both are artists. Peter is a photographer. They grew up in Massachusetts, studied together in college there, have lived around in various places and done various things, have settled in Casanova, and Judy has made a wonderful life for herself there. She's very active in the Casanova and the Central New York Watercolor Societies, and is a signature member of Central New York, and is among, and is one of our members now as well, along with a bunch of other people who came to us during COVID because of the fact that we got together with everybody on Zoom and continued to meet. So Judy is a wonderful landscape painter and plein air painter. She's brought lots of paintings that are for sale over here. She will tell you about them. She has studied with another person who many of us have already met and studied with, and that's Sarah Yeoman. And so without further ado, I'm going to let her tell you a bit more about herself, but welcome, Judy. I'm very glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I feel like I know a lot of you. I follow so many of you on social media, so tonight I think it's going to be like painting with old friends, which is a really nice feeling. You pretty much covered everything about me. I did go to 2 schools. I went to New England School. I graduated from New England School of Art and Design, but prior to that, I had gone down to SMU, Southeastern Massachusetts University, and I majored in illustration there. And at that university, I had to take comparative politics and English and all these classes that I decided I didn't want to go to. So I did not go to them, so I ended up flunking them, getting put on academic probation. And my parents said, we're not going to pay for you to go to school to not go to classes, so you need to decide what you wanted to do. So I took a year off, and I worked as a secretary at Coldwell Banker Real Estate. And I did freelance graphic design work while that went on. And I went to an interview for a place, and they said, looking at my portfolio, they could hire me on the spot, but they needed me to go back to school and get a degree. So I took their advice, and I went to the New England School of Art and Design. I did not major in graphic design. I majored in fashion illustration for advertising because I really loved painting the figure, and that was a way I could paint that every day. When I graduated, it ended up that fashion illustration was no longer a career because photography and computers had all started to come into play, and they were no longer doing that illustration as their forms of advertising. So I then had to reinvent myself. And I did. I worked for Reebok for a little bit doing renderings of clothing for their ads, which was fashion illustration, but they called it graphic design, and I did more logo design. And then I took some time off. We moved to Virginia, and I turned to gardening as my outlet. It was before social media, and you would do your art, but only a few people would see it, and just sort of, I didn't have a goal. I didn't know where to go with that. So I didn't do much work, and I created in my gardens, and I turned our clay lot, I amended the soil, and I turned it into, I wanted it to be Monet's garden. So I did a shade garden, I did a white garden, I did an herb garden, I did all sorts of different things, and at the end, when I finally finished, I said, now I could paint my gardens. Well, it had been about 8 years since I painted, and I went down into the basement, and I dug out my college art supplies. I found some Strathmore paper, and I found the biggest brush I could find, and I went out to paint my garden, and I couldn't do it. I had my watercolors, and it was overwhelming to me, and I did not know how to paint. So I said, okay, if I can't paint the garden, there is a little weed there, and I painted this little tiny weed. And at the time, it was before Facebook, there was a place called Open Diary, and I posted my painting on this place called Open Diary, and a person said, that's beautiful. Could you paint me a sunflower? And I said, Yes, I can. So I went and I got some arches, 140-pound cold pressed paper. I bought a bigger brush. I got better paints, and I painted a sunflower. It took me about a week to paint this one sunflower. And I posted. He said, I love it. I want to buy it. Paint me 2 more. I thought, I'm going to be a painter of flowers. And I painted 2 more. He bought them. And then I didn't sell another thing for the next 10 years. But I painted every day. And I went at it. So I've been painting consistently every day, I'd say for the past 20 years. I just have not put down my brush. One thing I did do was I said I need to know my materials like the back of my hand. So I went to Daniel Smith and I got a palette of paints. I have since expanded, but I had my primaries, and warm and cooled my primaries, and I stuck with those. I stuck with my one brush. I had my 1-inch flat, and I had a squirrel mop, which I have now gone to a different brush, but I had my squirrel mop for my juicy stuff and my 1-inch flat, and I just used those. I used the same paper, I used the same paint, same palette, so that when I went to paint, I didn't want to have to struggle with my materials. I wanted to know what was going to happen. And if I kept buying, like the candy store, every new candy, every new paint color that came along, I thought I would never get to that place. I didn't want to have to think about this stuff. I wanted to think about the art. I wanted to be able to paint what I was feeling to create an emotion. And in order to do that, I needed to not have to think so much. So I did that consistently for 10 years. I have since expanded and brought in more colors and succumbed to the candy store of Daniel Smith and all of their wonderful pigments. But I think that was a very helpful hint in my journey that I hope some other, and I try to tell my students to do that too, to not worry so much about all the newest thing. Just keep to the basics and learn the basics. And once you've learned that, you could throw that out and just start experimenting, but you need to have some structure in the beginning. I have, now it's my 2nd year, I opened a studio outside of my home. It's in the center of Casanova, right down the road, right on Albany Street, in a big warehouse. And I did that because I was teaching classes in my home, and honestly, my studio was on the 2nd floor, and I had to clean my whole house for everybody to come in to go, and I didn't want to do that anymore. So I opened the studio down there, and I'm teaching classes, and I said to Sally earlier, I'm basically teaching the classes so I can afford the rent, so I can keep the studio. And it's worked out well. I've had a lot of students. I've had some good success with it. And we have fun. We really have a lot of fun. So one of the basic things I teach all of my students is prep work. And I take that to heart. I live what I preach. What I mean by that is I think that there is so much value in doing value studies. I paint plein air, I paint in studio, and in both cases, I do a black and white value study first. If I get arrogant and think I don't have to do that, and I'm in the middle of my painting, I'm having a hard time, it's because I didn't do the value study. If I go back and I figure out and I do all that thinking ahead of time, when I go to paint, I can paint with joy and less worry about the outcome. So this is a book I just started this year, that it's a Stillman and Byrne. Ian Stewart recommended those. We got those. I took a workshop from him also. And he recommended these, and I love it. I just have a little one for plein air. So I do with a watercolor pencil. I do little sketches, and then I take my brush and I wet them. So this is just this year. This is Black River and up at Old Forge. This is a private camp on White Lake up at the Adirondacks. Carey Pond and Old Forge. I'm not sure where that was. So this is a brand new book, so it's not that full. But it is something that I do, and it's helpful. I don't spend a lot of time with that. It's a quick little sketch just to figure out where my lights and my darks are, figure out composition. I often use my iPad or my phone like a viewfinder, and I will take a photo when I'm in sight. And that's where I can scope out the scene, because I find that when you're in plein air, you get distracted by all of that noise. And you go, oh, squirrel, oh, bird, look at that tree, look at that sun. And you try to fit it all in, and your painting becomes chaos. By using my phone, I can do that viewfinder, and I can simplify my scene. And I find that very helpful. It's also helpful taking the photo, because I can then take my my sketch, my painting from the day, and my photo, I'll go back to the studio and paint it again. And when I say paint it again, I paint things over and over and over again. I might sometimes paint things 3 to 4 times. So in prep for this workshop, I literally did my value study. Here's my value study. I was up in the Adirondacks painting with friends. And on the way home, it was the last of the season, it was October. And we were driving into Cazenovia, going down the hill, and this hill goes up into Caz. And the light that was coming, I'll show you the photo. The light was just gorgeous. It was one of those stop the car moments. So we all stopped the car, jumped out, and started snapping pictures. And it just struck us all. So I went home, I've done a value study. And the first one I did, oh, is that me? I'm hitting that. I did this one. Yeah. So I painted it again. Then I painted it again. Then I painted it again. And then in prep for you all, I painted it again. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, including the value study. And every single one is a little different. My mood was different. My thoughts were different. I learned in each one. Look at this one's very bright. That one's more subdued. So I think there's also value in doing that. That's sort of homework. You have a question? No, the value study I use neutral tint. I love Daniel Smith's neutral tint. I've tried other neutral tints. Do you know what neutral tint is? It's a gray. It is the mixture of red, blue, and yellow. And Daniel Smith has kindly put it in a tube for us so we don't have to mix our own. I like Daniel Smith's because I find that it leans a little bit cooler than some of the others, and I like a cooler painting. The others are a little bit too yellow. So that has been my favorite. So it's just a gray value study, where to find the light. So I use this, I reference it, I reference my photo, I reference my value study, and I reference, if I'm going to paint it again, I'll reference my painting.
What period of time did you do that?
Which one?
All 6 of those. Did you?
Different days. Different days. I'm a fast painter. I like to keep things loose. I find if I spend too much time on a painting, I will kill it. I really strive to be one of those artists someday that can go in and put down 3 strokes and it's a beautiful painting. I think less is more. I don't belabor it. I like the freshness. I like the freshness of the watercolors. I like to see a watercolor blend and bleed and do these wonderful, happy accidents, that become beautiful. It's the only medium that's alive. It does things all by itself that we cannot ever do, and there's such a beauty in that. And I think that's a problem too, because I love to paint so much. I love moving the paint on the surface. I can get into overworking it because I don't want to stop painting. So there are times I might have 1 or 2 paintings going at the same time so that I will walk away, because otherwise I could just, paint, and then before you know it, you've killed your painting and created mud. So hopefully I won't do that today. So let's get going. Let me talk a little bit about composition. There are so many rules in composition and so many different opinions about things, and I tend to, when I do teach composition, I tend to try to keep it simple. I like simplifying things, and I use the rule of thirds. What I mean by that is when I have my surface, I divide it into 3. So lines vertically, 1, 2, 3, lines horizontally, 1, 2, 3. And where these lines cross on your page are good reference points. They're points of interest. So if I pick my, what I want to feature, what is my story about, if I put that in one of those spots, it's where the human eye is naturally going to go. One of my favorite compositions, if you see I do a lot of roads and paths, I like things leading you through a painting. I like to do a story that sort of meanders through and tells you something, sort of a goal, a place to arrive at, is one of my favorite stories to tell. I had a friend say to me, I don't know the places that you paint, but when I look at them, I want to go there. And I thought that was the nicest compliment, that she had that feeling. I was like, yay! So this painting, if you look at the reference, what I loved about it was the light. The light absolutely struck me. But you notice the sunset, where is it? It's way over on the side. So let's not let this photo get in the way of a good painting. We're artists. We can move things. So I'm going to move that sun, and I'm going to put it in this upper left of the rule of thirds, where those lines would cross. So I want to paint wet into wet. So plain water. If that sun is the lightest source, that means it's going to be the white of the paper. So I am not going to wet where that is. I'm going to leave it dry and wet my paper, my sky. Everywhere else around. I'm going to go down into the mountain. And get that wet too. I'm not going to do below because water goes where the path of least resistance. So if I wet my whole thing, it's all going to run down there. I want to control it a little bit so it will stop where it hits the dry of the paper. So our lightest value color is what? Yellow. So I'm going to start with yellow. I'm going to work light to dark. And now I'm sure you've all heard about the different consistencies of paint. The tea, the milk, the cream. So I'm starting with tea, and that means the thickness or thinness of the water. So it's similar to tea. It's very wet. And this is, what yellow am I using? I am using, this is where I need my glasses. Imidazzolone Lemon, and it is a Holbein. So I'm going to go around the sun. And the sun is coming out. And it's striking some areas. So this is a little bit of an underpainting also. And it's striking over here. It's coming over here because the sun is shining here. And I am going to have to make up some of this because that is way over there. This is here. It's also in the road. Comes up there. It's in these trees. Now I'm going to do cerulean blue. I've tried different cerulean blues. My favorite is Winsor Newton. I don't want to bash any others, but I find that this one mixes better. Some others are kind of sticky, and they granulate too much for me. I find that the Winsor Newton is a smoother. You know, every brand has a different feel to it. Looks dark, right? Can I tilt this? Will the camera still see it? So if you paint it and it looks just right, it's probably not dark enough. If you paint it and it's too dark, it's going to dry probably the right color. Watercolor dries about 35 to 40% lighter than when you put it down. And that's a hard thing to know. That's a hard thing to remember. To this, I'm going to add a dot of carmine. Carmine is one of those colors that a little bit goes a long way. See that? It was just a tiny dot. See where that happened? I'm going to add ultramarine to that. I'm making a purple. If I go quiet, forgive me, it's because I'm thinking. Uh-oh. Don't do that. I have a towel. I use a towel, so I'm constantly in and out with my brush in my towels to help with the wetness and the flow. And I'm using a Robert Simmons Skyflow, 1.5 inches. Sarah Yeoman introduced me to this brush, and I love it. You can do a whole painting with this brush. It's a wonderful brush. See how this is separating? If I just leave it alone and let it do its thing, it's going to make these things on the paper that are just delicious. Absolutely delicious. This mountain, it's in the background. So it's not going to be, it is dark, but it's not, I want it to be soft. So that's why I wet that. I'm going to take ultramarine, and I'm going to add to it Piedmontese Genuine. And I have a story about Piedmontese Genuine. I was teaching a Zoom class, and the names on these paints, I never know how to pronounce them. And I said Piedmont, Pommeat, and some woman, I don't even know who it was, in her best Julia Child's voice said, Judith. And I thought, oh no, I'm in trouble. She said, it's Piedmontese Genuine. So from now on, from then, it was hysterical. I said, okay, from now on, I will call it Piedmontese. So I'm using Piedmontese Genuine with ultramarine. Piedmontite. Piedmontese. She said it with a French accent, like Julia Childs. So I'm going to take her word. I'm not going to argue with her. And it's this mahogany brown, has a little red in it, and it makes this luscious. Look at that. And because it's wet, it's running. And I can control that by tilting my paper. I can even add more Piedmontese.
I'm sorry, did you say Piedmontese is kind of a...
It's like a mahogany brown. It has a little red in it. So it's separating. See, does it show the purple that it's separating? With the ultramarine, which is very granular, it does this delicious thing that I really love. So this painting, I think, is also about warms and cools. So we have this beautiful sun, we have this purple mountain, and then as we have this play of light. Now, it's not in the photo, but we're artists. We can make it anything we want. So I'm throwing in some, here's another name. Pyrrole. Is it Pyrrole or Pyrrole? Orange. I added that, and I added some Quin burnt orange together. So the sun's hitting that. I can bring it over here. So if you put a color one place, you need to put it somewhere else to unify your painting. I'm switching now to my smaller brush. This is an Escoda 14 Perlite. I have all my students get these. It's great because it's got this gorgeous, look at that point. I can go tiny, tiny with it, and I can do big washes. And I opened a brand new one for you guys. This is my older one. I'm tough on brushes, so I do go through. These are a good price point. I get them on Amazon. You could get them at Cheap Joe's too. I think they're about $35, $40, which is a good price point for a brush, I think. Quinacridone Gold, I love. I call it Liquid Sunshine. So that sun's coming down and hitting here. So I'm letting the colors mix and mingle on the paper. I'm working between my orange, my yellow, my purple. And it's going to create things in here, all on its own. And I also kind of want to get rid of the white of the page, the paper. And I think I'm working sort of mid-values right now. I haven't put in my darks yet. I've got my light and mid-values. So this is all in shadow. I'm going to use that same ultramarine, Piedmontite. I'm going to add a little dot of carmine to that.
Are most of your colors Daniel Smith?
Most of them are Daniel Smith. Winsor Newton for my cerulean, and then I have recently been buying Holbein. Not a lot. The opaques, if I use opaques, they tend to be Holbein. They're very creamy. I love the texture of them. And I'll talk about that in the end when I throw a little bit on there. So this is all in shadow because it's the other side of this hill. Remember what I said, if it looks right, it's wrong? That's too light, I know that, but I have an opportunity to put more on there. And this is also in shadow, but I want to leave some areas where I painted that yellow for that light to dance and come through. I want to connect these two. I have a shape here and a shape there. I want to connect them, and I'm going to do that with a warm and a dark. Now, there's some texture in the snow. I don't want to splash my whole painting, so I'm going to cover that. And people have asked me how you splash. I hold my finger and I hit the brush this way. People go like this and it just doesn't, they end up splashing themselves. So that, and different size brushes are going to give you different size splashes. If you want big splashes, use a big brush. If you want little splashes, use a little brush. And I got it in the sky. I'm going to leave it, I think.
It's a bird.
Ah, it's a bird. So the reason I am touching it is because this is a staining pigment. So while it's wet, that one I'm going to leave. And while it's still wet, I can play. If I didn't like that splashing, I can go on top of it as long as it's still wet. And that needed to go darker anyways. So the next I want to do is the trees. And those are pretty dark. I want the paper to be semi-dry. And it's still cool to the touch, but it's not wet, so I think I'm going to be okay. I'm going to do thick, I'd say almost cream of ultramarine. See the difference? See how this is tea and it's running on my palette? This is staying where it is, so I know that's a thicker paint. I'm going to add quinacridone, burnt orange, Piedmontite, and look at that. It's almost a black. I might add a touch of carmine. So I don't usually work straight from the tube. I mix things. So when people say, what color did you use? It's like, well, everything on my palette, went into that. It's hard to say what color because it's a mixture. So my trees, we've got the light here. So the trees that are in front of the light source are also going to be lighter. So I want to show the light on the tree. So if I paint everything the exact same color, it's going to be flat. I need to fool the eye. So the farther away from the light, the darker it's going to be. And notice, see how I'm holding my brush? I'm going to want to keep it loose. I don't want to keep it tight. I want to paint with the tip of my brush. And I am going to scribble. So maybe the sun comes over here and it's going to hit some spots. And it's darker on the bottom. I want to be careful that I don't do branch, branch, branch to keep it all the same. I want to break it up because nature is irregular. We humans, man-made, line everything up. Nature doesn't do that. There's brush going on back there. So this tree, I'm going to have orange, it's going to come behind that telephone pole. And it's sort of pointing to my focal, which is my sun. So I'm sort of telling everybody, hey, look here, look here. So I think this road could go darker. I'm going to go for it. I think this can go darker. So you have to paint the dark in order to see the light. I tell my students to embrace their dark side. So this, I want to connect. I'm going to bring that up there. But here's where what I was talking about, that this in front of that sunlight, that source of light, I can fool the eye. And what if I just use a warm color? It's not in my photo reference. But it's my painting, right? It's your painting. You can do what you want. While it's wet, I could just charge in some darks. Let it run. Let it create its own magic. Notice when I do branches and trees, I'm not painting like this. I'm holding it here and I'm using my arm. I'm doing one stroke. Because I don't want to stop midway and get fussy. I just want it to flow. Now we have some nice dark branches over here. Same thing that I did before. I'm going to scribble. keeping it loose. So here's the difference on this side. My sun is here. My light source is there. So if I did all dark like that one, that wouldn't make sense. I see this strong orange here. I have it here, but what if I then bring it up? Into these branches. That sort of tells the story that there's light back there. Quinacridone gold. I'm going to add yellow and quinacridone gold. So I think that's so much more interesting than just one color. I haven't addressed this area at all yet. I see I missed a little bit down here, but it's warmer there, so I should have done this earlier. But let's see if I can fix my own. I can. So the sky's got this cerulean blue. I really don't have it anywhere else but this patch right there, right? So I think I need to put it somewhere else. So this gives me a great opportunity in here to push this value of the white of the paper back a little bit and use that cerulean there. Likewise over here. I might push that back. When I say push back, I mean use value to make something less prominent. That white of the paper is the lightest value, and it sort of was sticking out and screaming like a spotlight. I didn't want it to, so I need to lessen the value. So I could just do that and do a light glaze over it, and it pushes it away.
Are you looking at your value study?
I should be. I'm back and forth. I'm actually looking more at this painting than I am at the value study, and I think I've painted it so much I kind of know what I'm doing.
Number 7.
Do what I say, not what I do. So this is the road where it sort of just disappears. I'm going to do that cerulean blue. There's a shadow from a shrub here that comes very lightly across the road. And over here too. I'm just connecting the shapes. Little dots of orange, and see it's going to follow the path where I put that water. I don't really have to do much, do I? This, I think, can go darker. Is it too late? No. So the plays of these warms and cools is really yummy. So tree branches. Did you know that the ends of trees, if they point up, the tree is alive. If they point down, it's a dead branch. I never knew that. Somebody showed me that. So this tree is alive, so I'm going to go up. This is awful neat. I don't like neat. So I'm going to mess it up. How are we doing for time? It's 8 o'clock. We've got a whole hour.
Judy, we ordinarily take a break about bedtime.
How about 8:15? Okay. Let me show you something. Telephone poles. I like telephone poles in my paintings. I like fences in my paintings. They are another opportunity to show perspective. A lot of my friends say, oh, take the telephone pole out. I hate it. It's so ugly. I like a little bit of a man-made structure in my painting. Painting that straight line, it's a bugger. One way to do it is, you know, you get in the mail these free cards, plastic cards. I save them. I'm going to mix up some pretty thick paint. Piedmontese genuine. So I didn't mention, this is a John Pike large well palette. And I like it because it's big painting surface, it's big area. And if you notice, I have it on a tilt. Because when I have all my paint on it, my washes, they will run down and they will stay down here, and it will keep, it sort of helps you continuously clean your palette. Because if this is dirty and muddy and I keep going into it, if that's mud, that mud's gonna come onto my painting and become mud. So this is a nice way, if you have a lot of washes, for them to get out of your way. So here, Eric, I'll think of his name, showed me that one. So the edge of this, and I hope this is going to work. Once you put it down, keep it down. Don't fuss. You've got to get in and get out. Boom. It didn't do it down there. That's okay. If I go back, I will mess it up. So I'm going to leave it. This side is a smaller one. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to mess it up. So it's just suggestion of a pole without getting too contrived. I want to keep it free. I want to keep it loose. Now, because this brush has this great point, I can do a little calligraphy. This would be great to use a flat. Works smart, right? And that brush is going to do it for me. I don't have to fuss. Now, just like everything else, I don't want just flat color. The sun's hitting that. Let me just throw in a little warm on one side. Same with the pole. Just touch it. Let it do the work. Telephone lines. I would use a rigger for a dark line. For a light line where it's going to come in front of these trees, this is pretty dry. I like to scrape it out. There's a point in a painting where you can scrape, and I'm beyond that because it's dried. I can, with a fine mist, spray it, and hopefully just use my fingernail and I get my white line. So that's more convincing than me with a brush, with my shaky hand. Now I'm going to use a brush with my shaky hand and do a dark line. And again, get in, get out. Don't fuss with those lines. The minute you go back and touch a line, it becomes contrived and it's not convincing. If it dries out halfway through it, just leave it. Absolutely leave it. That can be bigger. So I can see that I do have some darks to put in and some more finessing, but if you need to take a break, I think this is probably the best time. Have a little break and I'll come back and I'll finish up with my darks and a little bit of lifting, and I think it will be done. Okay? So, nice break. So some people came up to me and we talked about a couple of things I thought I'd like to share with everybody. Somebody asked me, how do I keep my paint wet in my palette? Being that I paint so much, it never really dries out, but I told her I do start every day when I get to my studio, I spray everything down. At the end of the day, this is another reason I like the John Pike, it has a cover, a lid, so I seal it up at night. If it's going to be a long time between my painting, I would take a damp sponge and I will put it in here and then cover it, and that keeps things pretty moist. Another thing that I do when I squeeze out my tube, if you see how these are in circles, and it goes down to the bottom in the middle, I do that so that when I do spray, the water is going to stay in that area and then reabsorb into the paint. So if I just had a mound of paint, it would roll off. This way, now that's going to sit in there and it's going to absorb into the paint and keep everything nice and juicy. Juicy paint gives you better pigment in your painting. To scrub a dry thing of paint, you're never going to get it dark enough in your values and your colors that you want. So to have nice juicy paint is a good place, I think, to start. One less thing to fight with all the things that we deal with painting, is having your palette ready to receive you. So I was looking at this while we were taking a break, and I do need to do a couple of things still. I think that I need to do some lifting. I like the idea of the road lines in there, and I like to put in what I call fairy lights. It's sort of indications where the light is bouncing around, and I do that with what I call a thirsty brush. I use a synthetic brush. This is very old and it's well loved. I've used it a lot. I've had it since college. The way to get a thirsty brush is you take your synthetic brush, you wet your brush, you dry your brush. So it's slightly damp. It's not soaking wet, it's not dry. I keep a towel in my hand. I will go into where I want to lift, and it lifts the paint right out. I can do it when it's wet. I could do it when it's dry. And notice after I lift, I go back into the water and I use the cloth again. Because if I do this and then I go back into it without wiping that off, that paint I just took off is in my brush, and I'm going to put it back into the painting. I don't want to do that. So I want a clean brush. And every time I lift, I wipe. I lift, I wipe. I lift, I wipe. So when I say fairy lights, what I mean is like in areas like this, I lifted that. See these little spots of light? So if I've gotten too dark, it's a way to bring back light. And see this little area that has a hard edge? That's in the distance. Maybe I don't want a hard edge in the distance. I want it to be soft and fuzzy. I'm nearsighted. I don't wear glasses because I like the softness of the world. When I was young, my aunt, it was wintertime, and there were a bunch of bare trees. And I said, Aunt Joan, I just love the soft, fuzzy trees. And she turned to my mother, she said, Jan, I think Judy needs glasses. So they got me glasses, and I took them off. I liked to see the world. You know, everybody goes squint to see the shapes. I don't have to. That's how I view everything. So there's an artist that painted, I don't know their name offhand, with very long necks and sort of contorted faces, and I thought, oh, he's brilliant. Look how he renders the form. He had something wrong with his vision, and that's actually how he saw people. So when I paint fuzzy stuff, it's not because I'm brilliant, it's because that's what I see. So if I want to soften this edge, I can use my thirsty brush, and I could just go in with water, clean water, and I could just soften that. So that fuzzes it out. The light's coming here. It might bounce off. There's a little fairy light. This is a little hard-edged. Maybe I want to soften that. Maybe this light coming in here. Maybe I need to soften this and lift this a little bit. Now, I don't use a scrubber. I find it too hard, and you can often scratch your paper. I think this is a softer way to do that. Light's coming here, maybe it will bounce off right there. Just introduce a little bit of lightness. These hard edges, I can really just use this to blend. Get away, take that white away. I think I want to connect that. I think up in here, I can do a little. Some areas like this, see how hard that is if I wanted that soft? It's subtle, but it makes a difference. See how it's just softening that? I think here needs a little bit of work. I don't think I need to go darker, but I think I could lift a little. The light's peeking through here. If it's peeking and hitting here, wouldn't it hit here too? So maybe I need to do a little lifting in there, just to be convincing that there's light. Coming over here, it's hitting there. I like that, and I'll leave that alone. I think I could do a little bit of messing up. I'm going to wet it first. And I'm going to mess it up. Now, remember I talked about Holbein and their opaques. My new crush is Horizon Blue by Holbein. Horizon Blue. It is a teal blue, a light blue. I adore it. Because this painting has so much orange in it, its opposite, I think, would be lovely in this teal blue. And I only use opaques at the end of a painting, because if I start putting it in, things can get chalky. And I want to keep the loose transparency of it. So just a little bit of a surprise of a color. Now this road, there's a direction to it. I want my splashes to go in the direction, so I'm literally going to go across that way. If I don't like it, I could blend some of them. I love that. I'm going to leave that. I can have it maybe touch Little dot there, a little dot there. I don't want to overdo it. But isn't that nice? It gives that little bit, it's magic. Yummy, yummy, yummy. If it's too much, that might be too much. I could just go back over. Painting is almost done. I don't want to overwork it. See what I mean? I love to paint. I could just keep going all night and then I'd overwork it. A little bit of orange, some calligraphy. I can do a little splashing with orange too. I don't want to work on it anymore. I think it's pretty done. The last thing I would do would be to sign it. This right here maybe could go a little darker. Not too much. See how I'm in and out of the towel with my water? I want that tree to be in front of that tree. A little bit of calligraphy. And I think that is calling it a day. Any questions? Yes?
How do you treat your paper?
How do I treat my paper? I don't stretch. I just tape to a board. I'm such a fast painter. If I was a detailed painter, I think I would wet and stretch and staple down if I was going to do a painting that took a long time, a week. But the most I would be 2 hours with, especially this size. I like to get in and get out and keep it fresh. And that's just my style. Everybody's got their own way of doing things. But I think it's fine not stretched for the way that I paint.
Very good. Thank you.
Yes? I have done Zoom workshops, and honestly, it's not my favorite thing to do. I get very stressed. Most of my painters that paint with me are people that are not computer savvy, and I myself am not a huge computer person. So their problems on Zoom become my problems, and I have a hard time feeling all of their problems, doing a painting, record this, let new people in. I get really a little crazy. I have done it, but if I could teach in person, I really like the one-on-one. I like talking to people. So, yes and no. I understand the need for it, and it does come in handy, but I don't know that I'm the person to do that. So over on the table, oh, yes?
I just want to say, I think you're fabulous, and I
Thank
think
you.
you're also one of the fastest demonstrators we've ever had. No one has completed a painting by 8.
So I have a reputation. I have a reputation. I am a fast, loose woman in watercolor.